Hi, my name is Bernie Rietkerken. I am co-presenting this session with Jim Carver from ARM, who will introduce himself during the second part of the presentation. And myself, I am a Sales and Business Development Manager at Riscure. We are a leading security evaluations laboratory and co-founder of the PSA Certified program. As a lab, we look at the topic of embedded security with a mindset of helping companies to make more secure products. And certification is an important instrument for that. Now, obviously, we are aware of the importance of security, and it's our bread and butter, you could say. And we strive to share and raise this awareness in the industry. So let's start from the top level. Why should IoT device manufacturers care about security at all? Well, the answer to that is simple. There is simply a lot at stake. From market research, we learn a lot about the rapid growth of IoT in general. So there are many predictive statements. Let's, for instance, look at this one example. 25 billion IoT devices deployed by 2030. That's massive. That's, of course, a huge opportunity for device makers, of course. But, well, with all these connected devices, this means that there's also a rapidly increasing risk of things going wrong. So see, for example, also this other statement from market research. There have been over 200 million attacks on IoT devices in 2019 alone. Now, you could say that this is a risk of the users of these devices, but it's not as simple as that. It's very likely that such negative events will lead to loss of business for the manufacturer too, because potentially of liabilities. In case of leakage of personal data, think of GDPR, or a damaged brand reputation as a result of a serious security incident, or perhaps theft of your intellectual property, or simply because competitors are more successful in marketing their security level than you are. So the business importance is clear then, but getting the security technically right is far from trivial. And that is because there can be many assets to protect. The ultimate goal of an attack is to get to such assets like personal data, intellectual property in the code, credentials, and more. So alternatively, but equally important, is the potential goal to change the device's functionality or to make it stop functioning altogether, or to gain control over infrastructure connected to the device. And then on the other side, there's a large number of possible attacks to be protected against, ranging from logical to physical methods, such as, for instance, side channel analysis, fault injection. And we should not forget that attackers are clever and inventive to continuously try to find new ways. It's kind of an ongoing cat and mouse game, you could say, on a very high-tech level. In exceptional cases, there's a direct way from an attack to an asset, but usually this is achieved through one or more steps in between. As an example, by using a first step to get into the device, then a second step to change something in the device functionality, a third step perhaps to obtain some device secret, and then using this secret in a final step to reach a goal of mass impact. And through that, the point of real damage is reached, but in a phased approach. So this is what we call so-called attack path. From Riscure's experience, we can highlight some important aspects to work on to improve overall security. I will provide these using a real-life example of hacking a smart thermostat. So the story starts with an analyst discovering that the UART debug port was wide open. So we consider that part of the available attack surface, which needs to be reduced as much as possible, of course. Interestingly, in many development environments, there's a need to keep debug ports open throughout the development chain, but then in the end, no one remembers to close them. So this is something really to take into account. Now, through that, the analyst was able to find a way to stop the U-boot booting process. So important here is to take into account, again, related to reducing the attack surface, not to simply reuse code images from other device implementations, without removing the unused parts. We see that a lot when for example, U-boot is used for the booting process, or Linux as the operating system. Pieces of code are then left in which are not actually needed, and therefore they increase the attack surface. Then, being able to interfere with the boot process, the analyst was able to obtain runtime control of the device, and through that he was able to dump the content of the memory. Now, there are several things that can be considered to make such a memory dump much more difficult. For example, encryption of flash content, which is an obvious one. But it would also be wise to hide some way the hardware connection to the flash, or to use even more hidden, the integrated memory. It was then not too difficult to find the encryption key with which he could reverse engineer the code. Protection of keys is really key as well. And with that, there were roads open to all kinds of opportunities to go deeper and deeper, even into the network. Now, other aspects that a developer can also pay attention to provide better protection are things like implementing privilege separation, or measures in software to mitigate fault injection type of attacks. But in many cases, this is perhaps a bit too far for the more simpler IoT device types, but something to be considered. So these are a number of key things to work on, and which we see coming back often during our evaluation projects. But there are so many other details to consider. So in conclusion, the potential playing field is quite complex. Therefore, when looking at the product development lifecycle, and more specifically the secure development lifecycle, the topic of security shall be treated with the right level of attention, of course. A starting point can be the education of development personnel, but in many cases it can be of huge benefit to make use of the level of knowledge and experience in external expert companies such as Riscure. We can play a role during any step of on the way. For example, we can provide that security training, or during the step of requirements, we can provide consultancy on setting those requirements. During design, there's a possibility to let a company like ours review the design, and with that, checking the security mindset during the development and the selection of secure components. Then on the implementation, we could, for instance, inspect the code for potential weaknesses. We can perform thorough penetration tests based on the vulnerabilities that have been identified. And within Riscure, we even have our own tools for hardware penetration testing. And last but not least, there's the potential to do certification. Now, you see the topic of certification highlighted twice in this flow. Certification can be applied on platform components, which can then be selected by device developers. And then there is, of course, the certification of the end product itself. Now, certification is key because it provides a level of confidence of the security of the product. And certification not only gives you as the component or device maker confidence of your implemented security, it also provides this level of confidence to your customers. So you can see certification as a means to communicate about the level of security that you have implemented. Now, of course, it helps if this is done during a well-defined and a widely accepted and recognized scheme. Now, certifying a product from scratch is typically a very cumbersome process. Certainly if you go all the way for a standard like common criteria. Even on lower levels, this is quite expensive. And this is why there are initiatives that specifically target the IoT market. The basic thought is then that platform components like the hardware chip and the operating system can be certified, which means that the cost of such a certification can be spread over much higher quantities because this chip or this operating system is used in many different devices. And then this allows device makers to make use of that component certification in a composite way. And this means that it is much easier to reach device certification if the used components in the device have already reached certification before. The evaluation evidence for the component can then be reused or referred to when aiming for device level security certification. And an additional benefit of starting with certification on component level is that throughout the entire security development chain, it is possible to make use of a central anchoring point for all security functions, a so-called root of trust created in the hardware. And this is precisely what the PSA Certified program offers. So it's root of trust validation in combination with the possibility to have composite certification. And that can be within the scheme itself, but also in the shape of mappings to increasingly recognized and important IoT security schemes and standards. Think of NIST and ETSI. But this is where I would like to hand over to Jim, who will tell more about this. Jim?
Hi, I'm Jim Carver, Strategic Business Development Manager for ARM, supporting the PSA Certified efforts. So let's talk about how PSA Certified can allow you to validate and go to market with a industry recognizable security certification for your end products. So PSA Certified is designed around a complete security offering. It's openly published, and very importantly, it's independently tested. So, we start off with a system that's methodologically developed around threat analysis. We've done very detailed threat modeling to look at how hackers commonly attack devices. We then look at how systems are architected, looked at the hardware that's used, the firmware, the different specifications, and so we have to architect a system that will address the specific vulnerabilities identified during the threat analysis. Finally, we have to implement this. And the cool thing here is that there's lots of reference implementations like the trusted firmware for Cortex-M available from trustedfirmware.org. And so, at this point, you've developed a system based on known threat models. You've architected it to address those models. How do you know that you've done your job right? And this is where certification becomes very important. So certification, you're actually using independent security labs like Riscure to take a look at your design and validate that you've actually done it right. This is absolutely critical because, self-evaluation is not ideal. And of course, our devices become the trust anchor in our IoT system. So PSA Certified is built on 10 critical security goals to create this foundation of trust within the devices. Ultimately, it's root of trust. We start out with a unique identification. Every device has to have an immutable, unclonable identity. This allows us to then, create a secure lifecycle so that we can identify when devices are being provisioned, deployed, and actually operational. This also allows secure attestation of the device. Devices can, issue attestation tokens that are cryptographically enforced. Of course, it's also critical to validate that the code running on a device hasn't been modified or tampered with. So this is where secure boot is vital. Secure boot also allows us to then implement a secure update cycle so that we can maintain these devices throughout their operational life cycles in a secure manner. We also have to implement anti-rollback so that a hacker can't roll back software to expose a previously identified security vulnerability that's been patched by a firmware update. We have to have the necessary isolation within a device to ensure that the secrets and other security assets are isolated from the potentially vulnerable application code. We have to have standardized ways of interfacing that application code down to the secure root of trust to ensure scalability and reasonable time to market. The root of trust also has to handle secure storage for device assets like keys and confidential information. And we have to implement the cryptography and trusted services within that root of trust. All of this combines to create this immutable root of trust within your IoT device. PSA Certified is built on a very easy to understand program. It has 3 progressive levels of security assurances and robustness. We have PSA level 1 to ensure that best security practices have been implemented on a device. For a further level of assurance, you can move up to silicon that's been certified under PSA level 2. This ensures that the hardware and its associated root of trust have been thoroughly tested against scalable software attacks. Finally, PSA level 3 silicon is silicon that has been certified and tested against both scalable software attacks as well as commonly encountered hardware attacks like side channel and glitching attacks. We also offer the PSA functional API certification to enable a software ecosystem that will interface seamlessly with this PSA root of trust. Again, this is all about creating scalable software development and lowering your time to market and maximizing your return on investment for developing secure products. Other important things to consider is how your devices are going to comply with common security requirements and regulations. The really great news here is that PSA Certified Level 1 is aligned against NIST and ETSI security standards, as well as California SB 327 state regulations. So we have to demonstrate these good security principles and best practices and validate that they've been applied. We have to make sure the chip has a proper root of trust. An example, of course, is the PSA root of trust. And we have to use a foundational security assessment to use a third-party laboratory to ensure that we've implemented everything correctly. And ultimately, this is what enables an OEM developer to create and certify a secure product. You start out with silicon that's been certified against the PSA root of trust. You design your product around that silicon. This allows you, once you take your product to market, to actually do factory provisioning of the root of trust secrets. So the security of your device starts in the factory. When you deploy your product, you can use cloud connectors and edge services and middleware that have been certified against the PSA functional API certification. Again, you're going to create more reusable software and lower your time to market and your total cost of ownership for developing this secure product. Finally, you can actually take your product based on PSA certified silicon, certified software, and you can take your product to an independent testing laboratory and have it also PSA certified against PSA Certified Level 1. This is really important because this creates an identifiable security mark of approval for your end product, giving you and your customers assurance that you've actually got secure products out in the field. This is ultimately very important to create trust out in the IoT market so that customers, when they buy a product, have assurance that the design was done right and that design has been validated by an independent security testing laboratory. You can learn more about PSA Certified at psacertified.org. We have a wealth of information there for you to explore, understand more about security vulnerabilities, and how to take your products through PSA Certified, as well as finding PSA Certified products. And to learn more about security certification, please contact Riscure at info@riscure.com. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you've learned a lot from this presentation.